Right. Good afternoon and a very warm welcome to you all to this Western Cape Provincial Parliament Ad Hoc Committee on COVID-19. Today we are meeting on the theme of citizen surveillance. I'd like to warmly welcome all the members here today, as well as the National Department of Health represented by Ms. Wilmerans. We also would like to welcome members of the media and members of the public who are tuning in on YouTube today. We have received an apology from Minister Mkhize, who has prior commitments, and as well as from the DG in the National Health Department, from Dr. Buthelezi. Ms. Wilmerans is attending on his behalf. We also have an apology from Honourable Bosman. Honourable Mackenzie is standing in for him today. We've also received a note from Honourable Heron and Honourable Lecker, who will leave the meeting early. Are there any other apologies that need to be tabled at this stage? I note that there's also an apology from Honourable Syed. Last opportunity, any other apologies? None. Thank you very much. So before we get started, as usual, I'm going to just take you through the rules of engagement for virtual meetings. All members are muted at the beginning of the meeting to avoid background noises. If there are any points of order, if those could please be flagged in the chat function on MS Teams, or alternatively use your raise your hand function. We ask that all video and audio be switched off to improve the quality of the connection. However, if a member, a minister, HOD or official is speaking, they must please put on their microphone and their video. We ask that participants switch off their mics once they have finished speaking and unshare their presentation once the presentation has concluded. My name is Mireille Wenger and I'm the chairperson of this ad hoc committee, and I'm joined by our procedural officers, Ms. Kluter and Ms. Adams. So today we're dealing with the theme of citizen surveillance. This is our third attempt since May to get information from the National Health Department, and we're very relieved that at last we will be able to get some information on this topic and have our questions answered. I think it's important at the outset to distinguish between citizen surveillance for contact tracing and contact tracing itself. As a committee, we have engaged extensively with the Provincial Health Department on contact tracing, with weekly information on this and their efforts to trace contacts in, for lack of a better word, a manual format. What our meeting today concerns is that of citizen surveillance by the National Health Department in order to trace contacts. So we're interested in the digital system and the surveillance part, as well as the database where the information is held, as per the regulations. So this is the matter that is under scrutiny today, the system and not the contact tracing per se. So we've seen governments from other parts of the world use location data to monitor and track the spread of the coronavirus. Some countries are using mobile network operators and use unidentifiable location data. But it is a matter of contention as there are privacy concerns about using this kind of information. So that's why we send through questions to understand, how is the system being rolled out in South Africa? How many people in the Western Cape are being surveilled? And are those individuals' rights to privacy being protected? Because we know that individuals are not afforded consent. However, tracked persons are supposed to be informed. Are they being informed? These are the kind of questions we have or we would like answered today. So if I may, by way of background, on the 25th of March of this year, regulations were enacted to enable the use of individual cell phone data to curb the spread of COVID-19 in South Africa. The regulations were amended on the 2nd of April for the National Health Department to create a COVID-19 tracing database. Essentially, this department is to maintain a database, a national database, that allows the tracing of people who either have COVID or who are suspected of having COVID. Under the amended regulations, the Department of Health will have access to information from mobile network operators about individuals' movements and until the state of disaster is no longer declared. So this COVID-19 database is supposed to be kept confidential. It is supposed to include names and surnames, ID numbers, addresses, cell phone numbers, and the outcomes of their COVID tests, as well as details of suspected contacts. The President in his address a week ago mentioned the system, and we know that a judge has been appointed to oversee this. We have not had sight of the presentation from the Health Department, even though we had asked for this meeting over 3 weeks ago, but we do trust that our concerns will be covered in the presentation. So on that note, I wish to introduce Ms. Wolmerans. She's the Chief Director of Policy Coordination and Integrated Planning. Please be welcome, ma'am. If you would be able to please introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about where you fit in the National Health Department and your work with the database.
Thank you very much, Chairperson, and good afternoon, members. Yes, I'm Melanie Wolmerans. I work for the National Department of Health. I've got this is my 33rd year of working in the public sector. I'm an occupational therapist by profession, and I've got postgraduate public health qualifications. I am officially the Chief Director of Policy Coordination and Integrated Planning, but I have been seconded to Health Information Systems, and I'm specifically at the moment also assisting with the development of and supporting the development of information systems as it relates to COVID-19, and I'm also involved in the creation of the national dashboards, where we are pulling together all information that relates to COVID-19 in one dashboard so that it can inform decision making, and it's specifically from a health perspective. Thank you very much, Chairperson.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for being with us today as part of the ad hoc committee in the Western Cape Provincial Parliament. Thank you for taking the time to present to us today and for answering our questions. How we work is we will start with your presentation, and then we will have a Q&A session thereafter. How we work is we allow each party represented on this committee, of which there are 5 parties. Each party is afforded 3 minutes to make comments and pose questions. We then have answers, and time permitting, we then move to either a second or third round of questions. So if that is in order, may I hand over to you, ma'am? Is there a point of order? Okay, must be a glitch there. So I'm going to hand over to you, ma'am, if you wouldn't mind sharing your presentation with us.
Chairperson, I just think there needs to be a point of clarity. First of all, yes. The system that was announced by the President is a digitized contact tracing system. So moving from the current manual contact tracing, which has health workers completely overwhelmed, it is a process to assist the contact tracers in a digitized format to be able to do contact tracing. And that's what is being, well, the launch of that is imminent. It's been rolled out to all provinces in the country. And the system, the proof of concept has been tested in the Western Cape, but it still remains contact tracing. So that's what I prepared some of my presentation on. If we refer to the questions that you have asked around citizen surveillance, and the involvement of Judge O'Regan, I think it's important that I maybe just look at those questions and just answer some of them. Currently, the National Department of Health is not involved in a system, a digitized system that is a surveillance program. In other words, where we are monitoring the movement or the location of any citizen in the country. It is also, I just need to go back into time. There was an attempt to develop a system that will allow us to do that. However, the technical complexities and the privacy concerns around this and the protection of that had us then to move towards a more active base contact tracing service rather than a surveillance system using the data of the mobile networking operators. During the period 17 April...
Ms. Wilmerans, I'm so sorry. Do you have a presentation or are you just speaking to notes?
I'm just speaking to notes at the moment.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
So during the period 17 April to 14 May, we did collect data from the mobile networking operators. In the meanwhile, that database and all the database of the data that we have received from mobile networking operators has been demolished. And we only have the details of the individuals from whom we have collected data from the MNOs, which we will publish as per the regulation 6 weeks after the end of the Disaster Management Act comes to an end. We have had numerous engagements with Judge Kate O'Regan, who was appointed as the judge to oversee that we comply with all privacy rules. And we have provided her with a report of the individuals for whom we have received data during the period 17 April to 14 May in an encrypted form. She has confirmed that she has received that data. So in terms of citizen surveillance, where the movement and location of citizens are being tracked, there is not a system that are being implemented by the National Department of Health. There is systems that are being considered, which is the Bluetooth solutions, which work on the Bluetooth platform, which they have successfully used in the UK, some lesser success in Singapore, and then some success in Australia. But those systems is opt-in systems, so you need to download the application on your phone and you agree to be part of the surveillance system. So it is not where you have no choice in participating in the surveillance system. And this basically would answer, I think, most of the questions that was put forward to the National Department of Health. I've covered all of the questions that was put forward.
Thank you. Short and sweet. All right, then I'm sure there's quite a number of questions. So if I'm just going to get my clock out. All right, well, I'll then hand over to members to ask follow-up questions. As usual, we'll start with the DA and I'll be taking the DA's questions. First of all, then according to the regulations of April, 2nd of April, the Health Department is to set up a national database to enable the tracing of persons suspected to have COVID. Has that database been set up? Does it exist? If it does, what kind of information is in that database? And if it does have individuals' information, what kind of safeguards are there to make sure that that the information is held safely? Are there audit trails to see who has accessed the database and when and for what purpose? And then has there been any breaches to that database? Has there been any unauthorized access to the database, or has it been sufficiently safeguarded for the moment? Then, if I understood correctly, you said that between the 17th of April and the 14th of May, information was received from mobile operators, but then it was deemed to be not useful. Could you just expand a little bit on it? What kind of information was provided by the mobile operators to the Department of Health? And what was the intention initially? Was the data to help understand who an infected person had come into contact with, or was it to track whether they were isolating? What was the intended purpose, which then did not materialize? Then I wanted to ask whether there's any parliamentary oversight contemplated in the collection of this information and in the system of reporting, or whether it's just whether it's the judicial review only as per the appointed judge for the system. Right. I will stop my questions then. I don't know if any of my colleagues would like to take up the last remaining 30 seconds or so. Honourable Mackenzie.
Yes, Chairperson. I just want to find out from Ms. Volmaran. She indicated earlier on she wasn't speaking to a presentation then. Is there another presentation that she can email to us? Because it seems like she had one, but it wasn't the particular one she was speaking to. I just want to get clarity on that. Thank you, Chairperson.
Okay, thank you. I'll then move over to the ANC. Are there any questions from the ANC?
Yes, Chair.
Thank you, Honourable Naka.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. I just want to check in relation to the information from the mobile network. Is there any other method that they are using to collate the data? But also in terms of the compliancy with privacy rules, what exactly are those aspects that they look into it? And then lastly, Chairperson, if I heard Ms. Volmaran properly, she made mention of the fact that there are no systems implemented by the Department of Health. And if there are no systems implemented by the department, where else, which other department has put in place systems in this regard? Thank you.
Thank you. Any of your colleagues like to take the remaining 2 minutes? None? Okay. We will then move on to the EFF. I'm not sure if we have any representatives from the EFF present today. Honourable Tseho, would you like to pose a question? No?
Chairperson, no, I struggled with network, man. So most of the time I was on and off, and I missed out some of them. So I do not want to be irrelevant and ask irrelevant things.
Okay, thank you. I'll then move on to Good. Honourable Heron.
Thanks, Chairperson. If I understood the input correctly, I mean, it sounds like the system is either not fully developed or is likely not to have the kind of scale that I think one would expect for effective contact tracing. Because if it started out with a kind of mobile data from mobile companies and then that was returned or dumped, and now it's an opt-in system, I'm wondering what the scale of this system is and whether it has been effective or useful for contact tracing as the provinces and authorities deal with this pandemic. Thank you.
Thank you. We then move on to the ACDP. Honourable Christians.
Thank you, Chairperson. I also struggled to connect today, but if I can just have my input. Chairperson, I just would want to know, the topic is citizen surveillance, so we don't have that. So we, as Mrs. Volmaran said, we're still working on contact tracing. Now, is this the kind of information that we wanted? Because, I mean, there was no presentation on citizen surveillance, and it's more contact tracing. So if I can just understand, are we speaking the same language when it comes to what we as committee is looking for citizen surveillance? And if we put the two together, contact tracing and citizen surveillance, are we speaking about the same issue? I know what Mrs. Volmaran says, that we don't have the system. Is that the closest system, contact tracing, that we have? And as I heard, the database and all of those things, is that the closest we can that we are to citizen surveillance? And will we as a country move to citizen surveillance? And if not, why not? So, Chair, that is my input. Thank you.
Thank you, Honourable Christians. We then move on to the Freedom Front Plus. Honourable Murray.
Thank you, Chair Lady. My question really, I'd like to know, why did the department initially consider surveillance and not contact tracing in the first place? What did they hope? What information did they hope to get together that would have solved the problem of finding out what they could find out through contact tracing? And they did collect initially information through surveillancing people. What assurance do the public have that they would have destroyed that information which they attempted to get in the first place? And I'm trying to find out what was in the mind of the department. What did they want to gain by having a surveillance program instead of just simple contact tracing like they now are doing? What additional information did they seek? And how would it have helped them even more effectively in the fight against the spread of COVID-19?
Thank you, Honourable Murray. Ms. Wolmerans, we then hand over to you, please.
Thank you, Chairperson. I'll try and respond as good as possible. In terms of the regulations that was published on the 26th of March and then on the 2nd of April, with regards to in relation to the database. So at that stage, it was normal contact tracing procedures that was followed as per the guidelines of the communicable disease surveillance, where it's the manual contact tracing, where we've got contact tracers on the ground to contact positive cases, collecting data from different incident cases, and then we'll follow up contacts and give them advice, and that was the normal contact tracing process. That is, and each province has got a database of the contacts that they have contacted, and it's not that people were contacted and they didn't know that somebody had given them the information. So it's a transparent process, which is part of the normal procedures of contact tracing. So there's in terms of a database of contact tracing, at the moment there's not, like I can say, a database like an electronic database of one database of contacts that has been traced. When we were collecting data from the MNOs, we had very strict security protocols that we did put in place, and we had no breach on any of those security protocols. And we presented the security protocols also to Judge O'Regan. In terms of the different protocols. She did advise that if we would have continued with the data, that we should also have gotten an external person to look at the security protocols to ensure that we cannot get illegal attempts to get into or hacking of the database. At the moment, as far as I know, it is judicial oversight. Also, in terms of, if I could just answer the question. So when the chairperson made the introduction, you indicated that you have discussed contact tracing at length, and you're specifically interested in citizen surveillance, which from my understanding was where you would use technology to find people, if I can put it, and track people through the use of technology, basically. And that's why I responded the way I did respond. So there's, according to what I understand, there was a line between contact tracing per se and citizen surveillance as another process. So during the period 17 April and 14 May, we worked on developing a proof of concept using the technology available in South Africa to be able to look at, will it be possible with the data that's available from mobile networking operators to actually establish a surveillance system where it would be possible to determine location as well as the movement of positive cases, and then also being able to determine how many people or who has been in close contact with an individual. However, that seemed to be based on the technology available in the country, you would, and the volumes that was expected, it would take us days to get that information, which makes that information null and void. Then in terms of a surveillance systems for the purpose of identifying contacts of a positive case. And we had an in-depth discussion, and also if we look at the report that came from Judge Regan, it indicated that in terms of the level of effort and investment that need to go into changing the technology, and then we cannot guarantee that people's privacy will be protected, we had to re-look at the whole concept that was available at that stage. So wherever we have worked with data, all rules in terms of security and data governance, which is best practices, had been applied. And therefore, according to my knowledge that has managed that data and information, there has been no breach or leak, and the data was totally encrypted. And the only thing that we still have left is the contact number and the names of the person from whom we have collected data. We have no data. And like I indicated, we need to publish 6 weeks after the end of the Disaster Management Act. We will publish in the public domain. I must also say that members need to recognize that this was in the beginning of the epidemic, so the numbers are very few in terms of, and at that stage also we didn't get complete cell phone numbers as part of the data collection. So the number of the people that for whom we collected data is very few. So if we then distinguish, so what I was mentioning is to say what the president was announced on Sunday was basically the digitization of contact tracing. So the current manual process of contacting a positive case and then ask them for contacts has been digitized through cell phone technology. And again, in order not to breach individuals' privacy, a person will receive a SMS to say, would you like to receive your results? And then they can opt in to say yes or no, or they want to be part of the process. And if they say yes, they will receive a result. And then if they're positive, there's what they call a chatbot, where they will communicate with them to actually ask them certain questions. And one of the questions that they will ask them is that they share their contacts numbers with them. And then there's another communication with all the contacts to inform them that they have possibly been in contact with a positive COVID-19 case. And then there's specific messages, the same message that the health worker would have given the contact is then being given to the contact and it's a digital process. So basically what this digitized contact tracing process facilitate is about a 75% digitization of the current manual process. And it's all about citizens that need to agree to be part of the process. And as we get uptake from the citizens, it will improve the efficiencies around contact tracing. The information that we got during the period that we collect data was basically the RICA information. And because it was difficult to get the location information, and it was even more difficult to get the movement as well as who a person has been in contact with, because it needed to come from the cell phone towers, and it was complex to get towards individuals that was within a 2-meter radius of an individual. In most of the rural areas, it would have been within 100 kilometers. In some of the peri-urban areas, it would 100 meters, sorry. And within some of the peri-urban areas, it would have been 50 meters. And these were some of the complexities that were looked at in terms of that specific solution. So RICA information also has got its difficulties. There's a number of people that would collect or that would take out a contract on phone, and they have multiple phones, and they would give that contract to another person. So that RICA address is not necessarily the address of the user of the phone. And that's also why, and there was quite a number of those that we found where the user of the phone and the RICA address and the RICA address were completely different, even in different towns. So you would have got false information that you would work on by deploying that solution. And also then it would have led to huge privacy breaches. Then, did I know? I think I've almost answered. Let me just check quickly. So in terms of surveillance systems, like I said, that are being used by a number of other countries, is what they call the Bluetooth platform. And that's where a cell phone, and also Google, in terms of Android as well as Apple, have worked together to create a platform. And all you need to do now is, for South Africa, is to add an app to that platform application, which every citizen can then download on their phones, and they need to keep their Bluetooth on. And then it will register everything that they get into contact. This is just one example that they get into contact with. And then once, say for an example, it's myself and I'm downloading the app, then as I move around, if there's other people also in my surroundings that has got their Bluetooth on and the app on their phone, then it will register on my phone that I've been in contact, but it's all on a database in a closed environment, so you never see it. If I then would test positive, then I need to indicate that on the app, and then everybody that was in contact with me for a period of 10 days will get a message to say you possibly have been in contact with a COVID-19 case and you need to go into self-isolation. And when you are having symptoms and yeah, the whole care in terms of being in contact, you need to go into self-isolation. If you develop severe symptoms, you need to seek medical care, and it will also ask questions like, for instance, around comorbidities, around hypertension, diabetes, or asthma, and etc. I think I've answered all the questions I maybe have missed, and then if I could just be reminded, but that's basically the summary. I think we must distinguish between contact tracing and the digitization of contact tracing and citizen surveillance. And in order to be able to not move into privacy breach, it's a process of opting in where an individual needs to be agreed to be part of a process.
Thank you very much, Ms. Volmer. Sorry, I have an echo, Ms. Volmer. Thank you. I think we definitely have time to move into a second round of questions. So I'm going to again put it to the members. I also had a few follow-ups, if I may. So based on some of your responses, you said that the numbers of people for whom information was sought from mobile operators was quite a few. How was it then determined who to collect information from those mobile operators? Then, from what I can understand, there's no single database.
Apologies, Chairperson, I missed the first question.
So I wanted to just understand the people for which information was received from the mobile operators during that window of the 17th of April to the 14th of May. You said that the numbers were quite few, so there weren't many people for which information was given over to the department. Was it a sample, or how did you determine who to collect information from the mobile operators? Then the second question is, it doesn't seem that there is a single database for contacts traced. From what I understand, and please correct me if I'm wrong, that there seem to be multiple databases. My reading of the regulations, my understanding is that there would be one national database where all of this information would be stored. So if the department is moving away from that system to rather have sort of decentralized databases, will the regulations then be amended? And then if that is so, and the initial program has changed somewhat, what is the role of the judge now in this revised system of operating by the department? Then you also mentioned that a proof of concept has been piloted in the Western Cape and in Gauteng. Could you maybe give us a bit more information on these proof of concepts and whether they were different in the differing provinces and you know, their levels of success, and you know, any other information you could share with us would be great. Then my final portion of questions is about the amount of information, and obviously with the number of infections, we can understand that it has overwhelmed the system, and the reason why you're moving towards an automated system. We know that South Africa is now ranked in the top 10 for COVID infections, so it's very important that we ramp up our responses. So the first question is, for this automated system, are you considering using artificial intelligence? And what might the costs involved be? And then finally, you know, we're already in the middle of July and almost at the peak in some of our most populous provinces. So when do you envisage that the system will be ready? You know, and if it's only ready beyond August or September, will it still be useful? So those were my questions. I believe Honourable van der Westhuizen and Mackenzie also had some questions.
Mackenzie, would Mackenzie like to go first?
It doesn't matter, member, you can go.
Thank you, Chair. I was just wondering, surely countries are talking to one another in fighting this and treading on this new ground. And my question is just what you pointed to various successes, some countries being more successful than others. what are the best models, the best practices that we should be following? And lastly, for this round, taxis are now allowed, it seems to me, to undertake long distance, trips. And my question is just, wouldn't it still be valuable to be able to trace people that move from province to province or over long distances? Because surely that must contribute to the rapid spread of the virus. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Honourable van der Westhuizen. Honourable Mackenzie, I'm afraid we're going to have to park your question for the next round.
Okay.
My apologies. Can I then move on to the ANC? Are there any questions from the ANC? None. Are there any questions from the EFF? Honourable Trejo? No. Then we'll then move on to Good. Honourable Heron?
No, thanks, Chair.
No. ACDP, Honourable Christians?
No questions, Chair.
Freedom Front Plus, Honourable Murray?
Yes, Chair Lady, thank you. I would like to know if the department also does cross-border tracing. How did we manage to do that? Was there any contact between our Minister of Foreign Affairs and other countries on our borders like Zimbabwe, Lesotho and others? Do we do contract tracing cross borders, and do we share information with them? And are we sure that they would also have secrecy clauses, that they do not divulge personal information from their side? Maybe we say we will not divulge certain information, and we very make sure that it is in safekeeping. Can we bind our neighboring countries to that agreement? Or will it somehow come out that certain politicians has been somewhere, but it's actually coming from other countries that divulge this information and not the South African government, because we share information with them? I'd like to know that. I'm very interested to get a proper answer here.
Thank you, Honourable Marie. I'm going to allow Honourable Mackenzie to pose his question so that we can then conclude this round. I don't know if we will have a third round. Honourable Mackenzie, over to you.
Thank you, Chairperson. Chairperson, I just want to go, and I don't think Mr. Volmaran's probably heard my first question. But when she initially introduced herself, she said she's not speaking to this presentation. So if she has any presentation with her that she can email to us. And then secondly, I'm just trying to understand what is the structure of Mrs. Volmaran's team? Because she did say she was seconded to this team or unit. Is it her? Is there a group of 4 or 5 people? And what is their structure? Who do they report to? And the information, whether it's a few or little, can she give us numbers? And who vet that information before they go to Judge O'Regan? Is there a team? Does it go via the minister? Does it go via a management committee? That must the DG first signed off? And when this database was set up, the period she mentioned between 17th of April and 14th of May, I think she mentioned, there was a submission of sort done, obviously, even including her secondment. Somebody signed off on those submissions. What was in those submissions? What was the role going to be in this team that she's going to explain to us, or a committee? And is the state security involved in that committee? Thank you. Or team, or whatever the structure is they have. So if you can just explain to us, how does that work from? Thank you.
Thank you very much. That then concludes round 2 of questions. Ms. Volmarans, if you're ready to, please, if you could respond to some of those questions. Thank you.
Thank you for the questions. Sure, difficult questions. Anyway, so if I can just then start with how did we determine the data? So we received, like all the provinces on a daily basis would receive the line list from NICD. We at National received the line list from NICD with the positive cases in an encrypted format. We de-encrypt that, and then we just look at those, just select the mobile numbers. That's the only thing. And then we ran it through a program that would split it up into the different mobile networking operators. So Vodacom, Cell C and MTN. And it's a program that's also being used by cybersecurity. And then MTN only got their numbers, Vodacom got their numbers, and Cell C got their numbers, and then the information in an encrypted form through a secure pipe, and an API was then transferred for us into a data lake, which is also secured. So that was the process in terms of how we determined the data. There was quite a number of cases on that line list of individuals that was positive, that where there were no cell phone numbers or there were landline numbers. And obviously for those ones, we could not use that. And that's why it came to a very small number. In the meanwhile, the number of cell phone numbers that are being captured by the individuals that takes the samples has increased to, it's almost 80%, so it's not that small as it was at that during that time that we got the numbers from the mobile networking operators. So in terms of the so when there was reference made to a database, it was the reference to an electronic database. And for the current digitized contact tracing system that is rolled out in the country, is we have that data onto a database. And then, so during the time where we did the concept, the test of the concept during the period 17 April and 14 May, we didn't use the data we didn't use the data for any either contact tracing or communicating with the positive cases. So basically, if I could maybe explain also, I didn't add that. So it's this very innovative technology that was developed in a laboratory development environment. And then we had to, with dummy data, and then we had to get live data in to look at if this would work in a real situation. And it was basically what we tested during the period 17 April and 14 May. In terms of the automated system, I would say that there's more for fourth industrial revolution technology in the contact tracing system that is being deployed, or where we're using machine learning and chatbots as part of the process and the technology that's part of the solution. The contact tracing system is currently operational in all provinces in the country, and it's imminent for a launch very soon by the National Minister of Health. Because key is to motivate citizens and to inform citizens that if they get a specific message, that it's not a hoax, but it's actually a real message, and that they should communicate on or react to the message. Also, in terms of the contact tracing service that has been developed or digitized, it communicates with everybody from whom a sample was taken. So both those that has got a negative test result and those that has got a positive test result, which contributes to raising then awareness around COVID-19 and reinforce the protection and the responsibility that each citizen must take to protect themselves. So in terms of best practices, we have been in contact with quite a number of other countries. In the beginning, it was mainly the Singapore tracing system, because they were the first to launch a surveillance system using the Bluetooth technology that is on digital phones. And the rest was basically what we have read around different systems that are being deployed. Also in Judge O'Regan's report to Minister of Health and Minister of COCTA, there's different levels of success in terms of the implementation of overall citizen surveillance systems. And I'm not 100% sure, but the Singapore tracing system was actually a very small percentage of the population that actually opt in to this. And in terms of the whole issue of contact tracing and surveillance and so on, it needs to be seen in its totality, and that the manual tracing and the digitized contact tracing or system that is being deployed together with the Bluetooth citizen surveillance, each are complementing each other. And the higher the uptake, the better the results. If the uptake are low, then the results that you get from that is also low. So there's a huge responsibility that we still have to engage with everybody and everyone around the whole issue of the specific, because there's quite a number of applications and solutions out there. I'm just taking it from my own children. Then I'll get a message to say, Mom, is this for real? Is dit rarig? Moet ons hierop reageer? And so on. So it's important that we've got the government system and that it's authenticated from government and that we communicate that to citizens. The issue with regards to the taxis, that's going to be a difficult question for me to answer, but to some extent, movement there is that we could use the Bluetooth technology for that. But in terms of just anonymized movement data, I'm aware of the fact that the CSIR, and there was an article published, I think today, that the CSIR is just collecting anonymized, completely anonymized movement data of individuals. But it's basically to complement other analytics that are being done in order to determine possible hotspots or areas of possible outbreak in certain areas in the country. In terms of the cross-border tracing, not that I am aware of. I'm not saying it's not there, but not that I am aware of, that there is, that we are sharing data with any of our countries on our country borders. What is happening at the border control is very in-depth and strict screening of anybody that's coming into the country, but also leaving the country through our borders, our land borders. In terms of the whole issue around the submission to Judge O'Regan, I was formally delegated to look at the engagements with the MNOs and to prepare the report, and that documentation is available, to prepare the report for Judge O'Regan. It was signed off by the then acting DG, and that's how the process has worked. And then there is a very, very short presentation that I have that just describes the digitized contact tracing system. In terms of the uptake in the Western Cape, we have received a very positive response from the Department of Health in the Western Cape, and they worked with us to refine the system. I think just for today, if I could just go back to my notes, just for today, they just released they sent over 10,000 SMSs to individuals, 10,743 SMSs to individuals around the results that's available. Chairperson, I think I've dealt with all the questions that was asked.
Thank you very much. Are there any final questions then for Ms. Wolmarans? I think if members could just do a show of hands. Okay. Thank you. Then I think this will most likely be our final round of questions. I see you, Honourable Mackenzie.
Thank you, Chairperson. Just one thing Mr. Wolmarans didn't answer. Is she the only person working on the team? And is state security or any other agency part of this? And is she the only person working with Judge O'Regan and the information go from the mobile operators to her and to Judge O'Regan? Or is there any third party in or externally from government involved in this? The reason I'm asking this is important because the concern around citizen surveillance was that citizens, and this was a concern, it doesn't mean it's happening, that citizens was going to be spied on. That was a concern raised when the regulations was first published because it was very vague at the time. But I'm happy that you clarified. I just want to confirm that it's from you straight to Judge O'Regan and to the mobile operators. There's no third party, there's no committee, state security is not involved. If you can just, and you also mentioned in your last point, there is some documentation available, and if you can perhaps send that through, we'll work with the committee to get all of those information, just to appease people, obviously. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Honourable Mackenzie. I then see Honourable Murray.
Thank you very much, Chair. I notice and I accept that the lady doesn't, she's not aware of information sharing between our countries on our border and ourselves, but it just makes sense. Somebody coming to this country from another African country, and he's tested here because he's ill, and they make use of our health services. So we test him, we find this person to be positive. It doesn't make sense that we will send him back because he's illegally here and not inform that government that this person actually has been tested positively. I mean, not positively, to be positive in terms of COVID-19. So there would be some sort of communication. Is there anybody that can report to us? Because it will affect the Western Cape too. Most of the people that come here across border come to the Western Cape. And I want to know if there's information sharing, and to what extent is the information sharing between the countries about people that's infected with COVID, who they came to see here, who they've been in contact with. That type of information can, for certain people, it can be, it can have very negative consequences in their jobs or whatever position they might hold. And we need clarity on this. Is there any, are you in contact with other countries about who people, tracing people and surveillance on people, who they've met, where they've been, who they've seen?
Thank you, Honourable Murray. We'll then move on to Honourable van der Westhuizen. Over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, I was privileged to read an article, I think it was dated the 17th of June, where a study was done in China which showed where one infected person was working at a call center, another one was traveling by bus, and a third one was in a restaurant. And how they were able to absolutely pinpoint who were infected then because of this one virus spreader. And well, what the article said is that, you know, it seems to me a recirculation of air is a dangerous thing, and I think we should open our windows and so on. But they were able to afterwards say, but at this table, 2 people were infected, at that table, 4 people were infected, and it just seems to me like valuable information. Perhaps Ms. Wolmaras can just help us to understand, how do we collect that kind of data here in South Africa? How will we inform the person that I had lunch with yesterday, by way of speaking, that I have now today tested positive? How automated is that process? Is that the automated SMSs that she's talking about? Or is it still a manual process of collecting those cell phone numbers and manually sending out SMSs to say that we suspect that you were in the vicinity of a person yesterday that tested positive, and we ask you to be vigilant in terms of your own health, and please even, you know, we advise you to go into quarantine for 2 weeks. That kind of information I was hoping to get today, but if Ms. Wolmaras could just help us, what systems have they put in place, and what are they envisaging going forward to help us to manage this response to the virus?
Thank you, Honourable van der Westhuizen. Are there any final questions? It seems then, Ms. Wolmaras, that those are the questions for the final round, so I'll hand over to you. Thank you.
Okay, so let me put on my video as well, then you can see me. Okay, I forgot, Honourable Marais, to answer the question about the team. Just to say that we get assistance from the Council of Scientific and Industrial Research. The data, patient-related data that we have collected over time, not COVID-related, which is part of the Master Patient Index work, are being hosted with triple security. It's got all the security certification, and so the data flow from the MNOs into that secure space, and it was destroyed from that secure space, and I have verified that. And the data that was reported to Judge O'Regan also moved from that secure space, encrypted, password protected with a double security protection, to Judge O'Regan. I hope that answered the question. The team that I'm working with, in terms of the national department, we are 10 individuals with different expertise and qualifications. And then we're supported by approximately 30 people from the CSIR that we are working with. Also data scientists, data analysts, and also systems engineers. So I trust that answered the question, Honourable Marais. And then with regards to the question that was asked about the technology, we must just, you can do, depending on the technology platform and the discipline that you have, but there's quite a number of individuals in South Africa that has up to 5 phones and 5 different phones that they are using. So depending on which phone I have with me is what the detail is that we will get as information. And for an example, it could be that I'm at home and my daughter, I leave my phone in my daughter's car, and then my daughter would drive and she might go all over places, and she might have my phone in the car, and it would then say that she was at the at the park, and she maybe went quickly to Clicks to get some medicine, and then she went to Checkers, and then she picked up a takeaway at Debonair's. And that will all register of places and then individuals that will be there, but it's not her phone, it's my phone. I'm just trying to explain the complexities of using the technology. And this is what we found, which is in terms of the contact tracing system that is being deployed in the country, it's an automated system, and that's why I refer to the fourth IR technology that are being used in terms of machine learning as well as robotic computing and chatbots, which is part of it. So it's a fully automated system. And the way it works is that a line list gets imported into the system. The system reads the line list in terms of the cell phone number, positive and negatives, and then it will send it the according message accordingly to the individual. For those that's positive, it will ask them, can you please share the contacts that you have been in contact with for the past 7 to 10 days, and then they can either just move it from their phone book, or they can actually capture the individuals and the cell phone numbers, and then it goes back into the system, and then again the system communicates with the contacts automatically to say that you have been in contact with a COVID-19 and you need to go into self-quarantine, and then there's a few messages that and all the messages that the system is sending out has been ethically approved, so that we make sure that all the ethical considerations are also being covered. Thank you, Chairperson, and thank you for the opportunity to share with you. The contact tracing system is in its early stage, but it does show at the moment a positive result in terms of the work that are being done. Thank you.
Thank you. And then I don't know if I missed it, but by when is it hoped to be fully established?
It is fully established. It will be launched. It's rolled out in all provinces. The first province that it was rolled out to was in the Western Cape.
Okay, so it's just a question of it being launched, but it's currently functioning.
It's functional, yes.
Okay, perfect. Great. All right then, Ms. Wilmer, thank you very much for having answered our questions today. You had quite a lot coming from all of us, so thank you very much for having provided us with the necessary clarity. We're also very grateful that at last we were able to have this engagement with the National Health Department, and we're very grateful for that. If you would send our thanks to the DG as well for having facilitated that. We hope that the rest of the process goes well, and we wish you good health and success going forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Then if I could just ask the committee members just to stay behind, and we'd also like to thank representatives from the Provincial Health Department that were with us in the meeting today as observers. All right. Okay, all right, members, are there any resolutions, recommendations or requests for information that you would like to table now? There will also be an opportunity to pose additional questions in writing. If you could please submit those by 12 o'clock on Tuesday. We will then send those off to the National Department as a result of this meeting. If so, by way of hands, if there are any resolutions, recommendations or requests for information that you'd like to table now. I see Honourable Mackenzie.
Thank you, Chairperson. Just the presentation, even if it's a short one, and she did mention the documents are available on the submissions that was done. And I'll send the list of questions. Just who are on these teams? We appreciate everyone is fully qualified. Obviously, we don't doubt that. Just understanding who's on these teams. And from the CSIR, because then she mentioned the CSIR, 30 people have got access, not access to the data, but a team of data analysts are working on it. If you want, I'm just trying to understand the structure of how this team works before the data gets to Judge O'Regan. Obviously, to ensure it doesn't get compromised.
All right, so the first was if we could have a copy of that presentation with the general principles of the surveillance and contact tracing that was referred to earlier by Ms. Wilmerans. Is that correct?
That's right, yeah.
Okay, perfect. And then a question on the structure of the teams that have information to the data as well as the, and I think the word is, or the de-identified data. Is that correct?
That's correct. And just a flow chart. So it flows from the mobile operator to the software where the 30 data analyst is at the CSIR. Then it goes to her with a team of 10 people. Then it goes to Judge O'Regan. I just want to get an understanding as to how the data flow is, because that's obviously the citizens, the surveillance citizens are concerned about, as to who have access to their data.
Okay, so a process flow of the individual information.
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Okay. Anyone else?
Chair?
Honourable van der Westhuizen.
Yes. Thank you, Chair. For me, a very important point, and it also points to the process flow of information, is the first point where information gets collected from the individual that may be ill. And I'm wondering whether we could write to the department and get the protocol in terms of how that information gets collected. I know it could be a form that people fill out, but you know, once I know that I'm positive, surely now I will have to go back and think very hard and long as to whom possibly could have been, you know, close to me and where did I move around with it, etc. And I think we need to be assured that that process is well managed. So if we could just get some clarity regarding the protocol, part of the flow of information, but from the first point where information gets collected. Thank you.
Thank you. So from the lab or where the person gets tested?
Or in the hospital. And obviously my concern is because I've this week also read that quite a number of patients die within the first 24 hours of being admitted to hospital. And if you're that ill, I'm not so sure how, you know, your first priority is probably not to remember telephone numbers or whom you've been in contact with. But it seems to me a very critical point in the collection of data or the flow of data, as Honourable Mackenzie called it.
Yeah, absolutely. You raise a very good point there. Okay, so we will add that to the list of questions. Is that you again, Honourable Mackenzie?
I forgot one point. As soon as everybody's done, Chairperson.
Just proceed. Proceed now.
Yes, I've asked the question twice because she mentioned a few. Now, and then in the conversation, she dropped 10,000. Just as she was speaking, 10,000 messages were sent out. Now, I understand 58 million citizens, 10,000 is a drop in the ocean. I fully respect and understand that. So they can just give us the how many numbers on that initial database from the 17th to April to 14th of May have they collected? Because she just mentioned in the conversation, they sent out 10,000 messages today, I think, or yesterday or something like that. Because 10,000 in the, yes, of 58 million citizens is little, but it's quite a lot of phone numbers.
As far as I understand, those 10,000 SMSs were sent out by the Provincial Department of Health to contacts.
Yeah, but they gather the information. Am I understanding correctly? Their team from the mobile operators.
I'm not sure if that information, I don't think that information came from the mobile operators, but rather from the contacts traced by the Western Cape Health Department.
That's what I also understood.
Okay, no, that's fine. And then, but because she said a very few has been collected on their side, but I don't know what it means. Is it 100, 1,000?
So those few, remember I asked the question on how they decided, you know, to collect information, given that there was few initially. But all of that information has been destroyed, aside from the number and the name of the person, so that they can inform them once the disaster declaration has been removed.
Yeah, I understand.
But again, maybe, I think, but you do raise a question. So I think our question should be is, of those that did have information collected from the 17th of April to the 14th of May, how many were from the Western Cape?
Yes, we can, because remember, they must also publish this information 6 weeks after the disaster management has been stopped. So it's stored somewhere. Otherwise, they won't be able to publish it.
Okay, so shall we ask then how many were from the Western Cape?
Yes, Chairperson.
Or do you want to know the total and then from the Western Cape?
If they don't mind, give us total, but they obviously need to give the Western Cape. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Great. Anything? Any other requests for information or questions? None. All right. Thank you very much, members. I'm very glad we could get to this point today. And then that would mean that we have now managed to at least to some extent have been able to deliberate on all of the themes that we set out to at the beginning, at the start of the ad hoc committee. So thank you very much for that. We will see you all next week, Wednesday at 1 o'clock, where we start our citizen engagement program, and we will have the Private Hospital Association briefing us, as well as hospital facility boards and some COVID survivors. So I wish you all a good afternoon. Stay safe and stay warm, and wishing you a good weekend. Thank you. The meeting is adjourned.
Thank you. Bye-bye.